There we go. I just will say welcome back. Thank you for continuing to show up and your commitment to this work. And we should have a relatively streamlined agenda today, but I'll hand it over to Senator Kushner to just say some welcoming remarks.
Thank you. I often say this is the best working group I've ever worked with, and I mean that when I say it. You guys have done a fabulous job of staying focused and really helping us to understand the direction we need to go in the state to ensure that every school in the state has good ventilation and good temperatures for our students' learning and our teachers' teaching conditions. So thank you.
Thank you for that. The first item for discussion of recommendations for legislation this session is the concept, and we've talked about it several times, but of allowing districts to do 20% of their schools per year, so long as 100% of the districts are receiving their 5-year evaluation within the 5 years. So that's sort of the concept to help spread out both the cost burden and also access to the testing and balancing professionals who do this work for districts. And so we just wanted to open up that concept sort of for your thoughts and feedback.
Maybe let me just add that, clearly in a small school district where they have two buildings, they would have to do one each year. It would be sort of a minimum of 20% each year. And it has to be 20% of the buildings, not 20% of the student population. But clearly what we're getting at is that we want to lighten the financial obligation on a district each year so that they have basically the ability to spread it out. In a larger district that has 20 schools, they'd have to be doing 20% of those buildings each year. I should have been able to do that math, but I think that would be 4 buildings a year, right? Something.
John, I see your hand up, and then Matt will come to you.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with that approach and appreciate the phasing it in. The only concern or nuance that I want to just mention is that most towns and school districts are already, have their budget submitted and in the approval process. So I'm concerned about if this goes into effect, say October 1, that some towns won't have any money budgeted for this for the first year. So whether a consideration could be, and I know this is a sense of urgency, and I'm not trying to delay this, but either some type of appeal if they can't come up with the money, that they could delay 1 year to next July 1, so July 1, 25. So just want to put it on a table that we're too far along in the budget process to add any significant money, and there should be a hardship process to try to at least just for the first year only. So I'm just putting it on the table. I don't know if there's a good solution or not.
I appreciate that. Absolutely. The timing of school budgets never aligns very nicely with the legislative timetable. In theory, districts should have allocated some funds to this work, right? Because they are supposed to be doing it this year. And if anything, maybe it could free up money because they only have to do 20% of their districts and not 100 or 20% of their schools. But I know that's likely just whimsical thinking, and I appreciate it. And pushing it back a year, I think, is something that we can definitely consider.
Or at least the hardship options.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Matt.
Thank you, Representative. One of the things that I'd like to also offer for discussion is that, yes, if a municipality has 20 schools, right, we shouldn't force them to do them all in 1 year. I think that's very sensible. But also, if they only have one school, it's not necessarily that they have to do them in 2024 either. I think The idea and intention would be to separate all of the schools into Connecticut into 20% tallies, right? So that, well, maybe a district doesn't have to do it in 24 at all. They would be doing 25. And not just that if you have 5 schools, you could do one a year, but also that if you have 1 school, you might not have to do it year 1.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Thank you. And could also help maybe address what John is worried about. Not if you're, a New Haven, but maybe for some of our small districts. Jan,
I want to just let me touch on that if you don't mind,
of
Jen,
course.
briefly. I think part of the problem I have with that approach, and I know we talked about it before, like an overall statewide phase in of 20% of all the schools each year for a 5-year period. And we talked about whether we do that by SDEs, numbering of buildings versus OPM, or not OPM, DAS's numbering system. But I think if we layer too much, I'm worried that it's going to become confusing for the district to know exactly when are we talking about. So I don't know if we would end up with the same distribution if we did a statewide numbering, or how we would make sure that it was not just by district, but also statewide. There might be another way to achieve that if we were to say, there might be another way to say to a district, you have some leeway depending on the size of your district. I'm not convinced of that, but that would be my concern. And I don't know how, maybe you have a different vision of that, but that's something that would be helpful to understand.
I'm sorry if I might jump back in to answer that directly. My concern is that if you say, so long as you get it done within the 5-year window, then everybody waits until the last year. Right. So I don't want it to see that everybody has to do it either year 1 or everybody waits until year 5 because they say, oh, well, so long as I get it done within this window. Somehow figuring out how to distribute this so that the amount of work getting done each year is relatively equal will be the best way to make sure there's enough providers for the process.
So I'm going to respond to that as well. And I'm sorry for the back and forth, but hopefully it will help us get somewhere with this, because the way I envisioned the 20% of each district was a minimum of 20%. So if you only have 2 buildings, you have to do this year. I mean, keep in mind, every school district was supposed to be doing the 5-year assessment on all of their buildings this year. We understand that that's probably not happening, but assuming we figure out how a little bit of leeway, maybe as it was mentioned by John, a hardship, or for those districts to be able to ask for a waiver for 1 year. But ultimately, if you're a district with only 2 schools, I would envision that you do 1 the first year and 1 the second year, and then 5 years from first one again, and you do the second one the next year. If you're a building, so essentially every school you would not have the option of waiting till year 5. You actually have to start now. That was the way I kind of conceived of it when I heard this. So think about that too.
I'll just throw out, I don't love the idea of a waiver process. We can talk more about that because I don't want to put an additional sort of administrative burden on either the districts or DAS or whatever agency ends up having to, in theory, navigate a waiver. I think probably we can continue to talk more about, and maybe we could even say for this first 5-year cycle, and then, but anyways, I think it's worth considering. Thanks, Matt. John, did you want to mention something specifically about this? Sorry, Jan.
I'm sorry. The waiver should only be for the first year anyway, because the budget process. I wasn't asking that there be a waiver process for other. It's just a phase in, and I think the waiver. I agree with you. It's another administrative burden, but it would only be for the first year.
think that's a great point. Thanks. Appreciate that. Jan?
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. This is a great conversation, and I think that we're coming to some very doable, very real ways of promoting this moving forward. There were some other lingering questions that maybe were answered at the last meeting, and I missed it. One of them we talked about was, really comes down essentially to how will a district choose those schools? Will they be complete autonomy? Will they be told to start with their oldest or their newest? Will there be a carve out for something that's just been completed? So I know I'm getting in the weeds, but I do think those details are important because in my district, I may have a project going on in my elementary school, so I want to leave that one behind for this year and instead focus on my high school. But if we completely leave it up to the districts, then I think there could be some concern about getting it done in a timely way. You could have a change in leadership at the district level and things could get lost in the messaging. So some sort of loose, tight way of moving forward, I think, would be ideal. And I'm not sure what that means.
So I'm tempted to give districts autonomy to have a little flexibility on like, okay, so we know when we have to do this for our high school, that is going to be a larger expenditure, especially in year one, than when we have to do it for elementary school, just for example. So maybe districts want to kick out the high school a few more years while they, plan on how to budget for that, or maybe not for whatever reason. So I'm tempted to give districts autonomy on how they prioritize their schools. But I would love sort of your thoughts on if that's helpful for districts or actually that makes it more challenging for you guys to have that autonomy. And I welcome Senator Kushner's thoughts also.
Yes, the other thing to figure into this is, and I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't keep up with who's on the screen here, but I don't know if CCM or Cost are here, but in most districts, who would make that decision? Is it the municipality that manages the buildings, or is it the school district that has to live and work and teach and learn? And so I think that we would have to answer that question too.
My understanding is that it would be the school district because you'd have to put it in your budget. And of course, your budget's subjected to municipal approval. But I think the prioritization would come from the district. But again, I don't know, Jan, if you want to reply to that or if anyone else wants to jump in with their thoughts on sort of that degree of autonomy.
I would love to.
Leonard, go ahead. I'll go after you.
All right, thank you. So as a representative from Cape, representing all the boards of educations in the state, we're facing some very abnormal fiscal pressures this particular budget cycle. And yes, I believe all boards of education realize that this was supposed to start this year. We recognize that. But we also recognize that a lot of districts are making very difficult decisions this year with the ESSER funds drying up at the end of this fiscal year. And they're going to have to prioritize on a lot of different things that have been pressed upon us that are considered mandatory. So to answer your question, yes, the Board of Education through the superintendent's budget and approving that budget is responsible for absorbing that cost and then sending it to the local taxing authority for it to be approved. With that being said, that budget could be cut and then sent back to the board. But that's with the understanding that we can't cut that project out of our budget because it's mandated by law, just like there's other things that's mandated by state law that we just can't cut. So now it forces us to reprioritize the work that we're doing in our districts to make sure that we cover for clean air. We got some other stuff that we have to provide for our students in the bathrooms this upcoming academic year. That's not optional, that's mandatory. And then faced and coupled with the fact that we're losing funding from the federal government, districts are going to be hard pressed to put this at the front burner, knowing that layoffs is very much on the mind of all districts in the state. So I don't think we're concerned about the professional services at this point and being able to do the 20%. I think we're more concerned about the fact that we have a lot of priorities and not enough funding to execute them. So we can recommend all we want, but if the local taxing authorities say, no, this is what we're giving you, fine, we're going to get it done, but just please understand that it's going to severely impact the deliverables that we put into our schools and for our kids and the amount of people we have to do it.
Thanks,
And
Leonard. Absolutely. I think that's always a pressure.
Representative Leeper, if I may, I'll just add a few more statements. I also would add to what Leonard said that we have the reading mandate, program mandate this year, and that is an expense that really is the largest mandate we've faced. That aside, that's this year. In setting up a process for this, I do think that a certain amount of autonomy for the districts is going to be very, very important because, as I said, we might have a project starting in one building, and that's not a great time to be in there doing inspections. And so even if I were to list, and I think Matt put in the chat, even if I were to say I'm going to do this school in 24 and this one in 25 and this one in 26, I would want the flexibility to say, wait, I want to amend that because I'm going to swap those so that I can finish this project at the elementary school or whatever. And really what's going on in our buildings right now is trying to put air conditioning in.
Thanks, Jen, for that. Lou.
I think Steve Schrag had a hand up before me.
Oh, sorry about that. Hey, Steve.
Yeah. Hi. I wanted to ask a question. How are we going to square the circle that we're basically telling employers they don't have to provide a workplace free of a recognized hazard when we're saying to them they can phase in when that hazard is gone? School workers face a problem with indoor air quality as well as our children do as well, but the law specifically covers school workers. I don't know how you can physically. In the real world, you can't spend every penny that there is out there on every single thing. But I'm not sure how you can tell employers it's all right to not protect workers' health. I think there needs to be some kind of documentation of what the impact is on the workers and the students. If they're not going to fix the air quality now, what is the economic impact on those workers and those students? Let's have both sides of the ledger, not just the cost side, but the cost of not doing it side.
I appreciate that, Steve. I think we're, I guess, operating under the assumption that not 100% of our schools are workplace hazards, and that hopefully a majority are experiencing sufficiently clean air. But I think your point's well made, and that's back on districts to prioritize those buildings where there is concern about the health and quality of the air to do this work.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
No, go ahead.
I don't think we're relieving the employers of any responsibility to provide clean air for their workforce as exists under statute currently. Whatever exists currently in the statute has to be observed by the district, regardless of what we're doing here in trying to make sure that every building in Connecticut has much improved ventilation systems and as Jan said, trying to get air conditioning in all these schools, because I think that's ultimately what we need. But it doesn't relieve a district from their obligations under current law. And I think if we're creating a suggestion otherwise, we ought to be very clear about that. At the same time, we know conditions have existed in schools many times over many years, and I know, Steve, you're very aware of this, that have not been good quality environments for learning. And there have been cases brought on school districts before, and I don't see that ending. I think that what we're trying to do is make sure that ultimately we're getting to the point where that ends, and facilitating that through this work. And, the other piece of it, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I do think maybe we should lay that out there, Jen, because it plays into this whole question of how districts do this that Leonard raised, that Jan and John have raised as well. We also want to recommend that the HVAC grants that are out there currently, that they would specifically be available to districts for the assessment, so that would help that we're mandating it, we're also providing some funds for it. Obviously, I think what we're talking about is the same relationship between, for school construction formula that we're currently using for the grants. We're not suggesting to change that, but there has been confusion about whether or not they're included or not as part of a grant process. And here I think we want to recommend that they are recognized as applicable for grants. If grants can be used for that. It's jumping ahead, Jen, but I thought it might.
No, I've been thinking the same thing. And I just also want to say to Steve, if there is a school that has hazardous working conditions because of air quality, that's exactly the school that should be applying for these grant dollars to address it. And that's exactly what this program is about. And so this 5-year evaluation for a school like that should be not the priority, and going for the actual improvements to the air quality is the goal. And so that's ideally. Secondly, and I don't know if Matt, if you'll let me put you on the spot, but I will say Matt persuaded me and I was grateful for, I should say he educated me as to why we want to recommend that these 5-year evaluations be eligible for grant funding, because it really is the first step in districts, one, addressing which buildings need to be prioritized for this work, and two, helping them know exactly the scope and what type of work needs to be done. And so I may have not said it as eloquently, certainly not as eloquently as Matt will say it, but if you're willing to sort of give us a high level summary, Matt, of why you believe this is also just a part of the full scope and sequence of improving air quality in our schools, I think that would be valuable.
Well, thank you for the glowing words, Representative. So I obviously wholeheartedly agree that you can't fix what you don't know about. And so to Steve's point, we might not know that there's a workplace hazard until we do this sort of testing. And so this testing is going to be able to uncover where the deficiencies are, allow the legislature to figure out how much money to allocate for the grant programs, and to understand the depth and the scope of the problem. I applaud the efforts of this committee to let the grant funding be applicable for this. Testing does help, because we're going to identify where those problems are. We're going to be able to start that process. If we don't give the tools to the communities that need it the most in order to utilize the grant monies for these studies, they might not do them. They don't have enough money. Leonard said it very well, that they have to prioritize where the funds are being spent. And so this helps off very much with the equity issue that we want to address as well, and not just have the grant funds fund shovel-ready projects, but something that has been identified through this process of, here's where it would be very well spent to improve greatly the indoor air quality for the students, and that's where we could focus it. Yeah, not just, well, our air conditioning isn't cold enough necessarily, right? But it's still a HVAC project. So I think by doing this, it certainly helps focus it where it will be needed, and I'll leave it there. I think you're muted.
You're on mute.
Thank you. It doesn't matter how many years we do this, it still happens. Thank you, Matt, for that. And Steve, I want to give you an opportunity to respond if you wanted to, because we just kind of threw a lot.
No, I just wanted to make sure we emphasize the fact that failure to complete the assessment doesn't reduce the employer's responsibility to provide a workplace free of recognized hazards. That's all.
I think it's a great point.
And I appreciate in the real world, they can't fix every problem this week. I understand that. But my experience is that employers find the money when they have to. They don't have to, they don't look for the money. So I appreciate I don't have to do a budget, so it's easier for me to say than somebody else to do. But I'm just saying that my experience is when an employer has to find the money to fix a problem, they find it. And so we need to, that's what the beauty of this law is, that it provides the resource, not just the requirement, but the resources. And so the question is, how quickly will they act on them where they need the most help? That's obviously what we're wrestling with right now.
Thank you for that.
Hi, may I
Leonard.
respond?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Steve, I want to say thank you for that. I'm trying to, before I respond, could you define what you mean by they?
Well, there's lots of theys in what I said. I guess part of it was just presuming that we're talking about school boards and employers.
Okay. And that's how I assumed it, but I don't want to assume in this public forum. With that being said, thank you for what you've offered. I want to make sure that I'm very clear that I speak on behalf of all boards of education in the state of Connecticut. We are responsible for providing an educational environment that's conducive to a high quality public education. Every single board of education member and superintendent in the state of Connecticut takes that responsibility very seriously. And we just want to articulate, and to your point, yes, when there are major issues, I can speak to Windsor where we've had a mold issue in one of our buildings, and we've had to go in and cut a lot of different priorities and stuff to resolve an issue because we just had to get it done. The problem is not every single district in the state of Connecticut may have that ability to absorb that type of cost in a moment's notice. I just wanted to make sure I articulated that there's a lot of requirements by law that's pressing down upon boards of educations right now. And I want to thank a previous speaker that spoke about the reading waivers, the right to read. That's also another pressure that's being placed upon folks. So yes, we can have the cleanest buildings in the state. That's an amazing thing. But if we don't have staff with overcrowded classrooms, it's creating a very, very tough balance for boards of educations, which we are responsible for articulating and fighting for kids. We still have to go to taxing authorities through our local town and the state legislature to help balance our priorities. The problem is no one in this state has an infinite pot of money to fund these initiatives. And we have to make sure that we look at it, I've always said, through 4 pillars: urban, suburban, rural, and the alliance districts. And there's all fiscal pressures being placed upon all 4 of those pillars to make sure we take care of every single soul that comes up on our campuses. So as we make decisions, I want to make sure that we look at it from equity standpoint and make sure that we're equitable in our decision making, and to make sure that we are putting true resources behind the expectations that we are asking our boards of ed and our school districts to execute upon.
Thanks, Leonard.
Well,
Senator?
I always want to echo one thing you said, is that it's unfortunate we live in a society where we have to pinch pennies to take care of our kids and our parents. Quite frankly, healthcare and education are the 2 most important things we could do, and we do a poor job of properly funding both of them. So I appreciate that boards of eds have a difficult choice every day about what to spend money on. All I'm suggesting is that we shouldn't create another excuse for them not to spend the money where they need it. That's all.
Can I jump in for a minute? Because I think we do need to, I appreciate what you're saying, Steve. And I could talk a long time about how we fund things in the state and what the need is, because I talk about it all the time. But I really think we need to stay focused on what our recommendations are going to be for legislation. I think the point that I want to underscore that Steve made, that we should make sure is understood, is that these assessments that are required now by the districts do not in any way, or any work that we've done to establish a system or a process for doing the assessments, they do not interfere with or act as some kind of a waiver for the responsibility to maintain a healthy environment that's required currently under statute. So I think that we just need to be on the record with that. That's not our intention here. We're not addressing that part of the law. But what we are trying to do, as I think Matt said very well, is really have a roadmap for the state on how we're going to get to a place where all of our schools have the best technology and the best ventilation systems, that they're state of the art. And that's where we want to be as a state. It may take us a while to get there. I do think that the other comment that was made, Leonard, about equity, it sort of leads into our 3rd recommendation, which is that we continue the work of working group through that we actually and to the legislature that we continue to meet, because I don't think we've really gotten to the point where we can talk about equity. So much of what we're trying to do in terms of the assessments is not just to focus districts and to help districts have a plan and the state have a plan for how we upgrade our systems, but also to, one of our charges is that we're sure that we're doing this in an equitable fashion. And I don't think we've gotten to the point where we've really established a process for the state to ensure that. So, there's some built-in factors like using the school construction formulas, but that may not be enough for districts that truly are, stretched so thin that they don't have the money to even plan for the construction that needs to be done to get to the air quality that we're seeking. So,
and you know what, Honorable Representative Kushner, I appreciate that dialogue, and I think we all should take a step back and say thank you to the state of Connecticut and the state legislature, because this is definitely something that has been long in the making, and it's a great first step. And we just want to make sure that we help all of those. It doesn't matter where their zip code is, because there's some districts that may struggle to get it done, but they're going to get it done. But we got to think about those that, quite frankly, just don't have the ability to get it done. And what do we do for those children? What do we do for those teachers, that superintendent, and that Board of Education? How do we support that town? And so that's where my primary focus is on behalf of the Board of Ed.
Thank you. I totally agree.
I'd like to chime in real quick.
Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So few things. So really, really appreciate and absolutely empathize with everything that folks have said in this conversation up until now. I think it's all critically important part of the process. Couple of things I just I want to understanding and recognizing what Len and Jan have raised as definitely relevant issues that we need to talk about. I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of value in what Mr. Schrag has said, and just point out that, there's a significant public health portion of this, and that part of the concern is, once again, if we've learned anything from those of us in the coalition who have been talking about the public health aspect of this, is that we're talking about life-threatening illnesses and illnesses that can change the course of a person's life. We have members of our coalition who spent decades working in a classroom, and as a result have debilitating chronic illness because of what we're talking about. And so some of the people that we're talking about are youth, again, some of them, many of them underserved in some of our high need districts, most high need districts. My argument would be that we need to prioritize those students. And so I fully agree with Senator Kushner. We need to continue the conversation at the working group. I also would like to start at some point a conversation about exactly how that grant program works, how it's structured and administered. I think would be very helpful. But going back to the first recommendation that we were talking about, acknowledging the issues that the folks in CABE have raised, I think it does make some sense to offer districts some flexibility in terms of how they want to prioritize their inspections. So Jan convinced me with her argument there. But at the same time, I also think that it's important to keep in mind that while some districts are struggling and may need a waiver for the purposes of financial hardship or what have you, there are some districts, and I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are some districts that are now making progress on implementation, and I don't want to create the type of confusion that is going to get in the way of them moving forward with their whatever type of conversations they're having with contractors, et cetera. So I just want folks to kind of keep that in mind as we talk about what this waiver process is going to look like. And thank you to the chairs.
Go ahead, Senator. Thank you, Lou, for that.
Yeah, that's an important point, Lou, because it does remind us that it also goes to the question of which districts should be able to apply for the grant for the assessment. I mean, I wonder if there are some circumstances where a district can afford to provide, to out of its own resources, pay for those assessments and where there are other districts that have a higher need. I know everybody, if they hear you can pay for it through state funding, probably every district will want to do that because I'm pretty sure that every district is struggling with their school board budgets. But that is something that we ought to talk about a little bit too, if we're going to make that recommendation.
Yeah, agree. And Lou, I just want to say I appreciate you centering that perspective in our work. And I think it's a part of why Senator Kushner and I have been really focused on how we collect data around these so that we can ensure that the schools with the greatest need and the highest health concerns are prioritized in this work. Because currently we have, much like our school construction, it's sort of a first come, first served process. And as the senator laid out, the equity component is sort of in the ratio for which you're funded, but that doesn't help us target our most hazardous locations, which is really the goal of all of this. And we just haven't been able to really access some data on that, which these 5-year evals are hopefully going to get us toward. So thank you for recentering our focus. Matt.
Thank you, Representative. So the current process, right, gives a sliding reimbursement rate already, which was, I think, designed to promote equity amongst towns. So I don't know that we necessarily need to reinvent that. I think that the results of the initial surveys can help then focus the grant funding for remediation projects, right? But I think that that's kind of step 2. Step
Agreed.
1 is making sure that everybody has the ability to perform the initial assessments and be able to get that data collected. And enabling that to happen. And I think that that's right on with our recommendation to let the funds cover that. And so I would think that it's appropriate that the same reimbursement rate that they get for the construction budget process would be applicable to reimbursement for the studies.
Yeah, I think we don't want to overcomplicate it and we don't want to recreate the wheel. So I do believe that, as you sort of called it, a sliding scale makes sense. And we can't really know who are the more hazardous schools or who should be the target schools for air quality improvements until we get those 5-year evaluations. Absolutely. I think you're right. It's sort of a 2-step process, and we still have our focus on the second part as well, which is I think why we want to continue the working group. Melissa, nice to see you.
Hi, Representative Leeper, Senator Kushner. Nice to see you too, and thanks for the opportunity to join today. So, Lou, in response to your question about the structure of the grant program, I just wanted to share that the program is structured similarly to our other school construction grant programs at DAS because our Office of Grants Administration team, that's the area in which they have experience. And I also just want to state that the nature of a program that would fund HVAC assessments is different than how we're currently operating the program. So we'd need to consider the resources that we need in the state and where this would best fit to fund grants that support the HVAC assessments, because at least at DAS, we don't have experience with that. I just wanted to make sure that I shared that with this group.
Appreciate that.
I have a question for Melissa about that. If you could be a little more specific, because I think we need to understand what would be the obstacles that you would see in using the funds that have been set aside for HVAC grants. What would be are there any obstacles other than we would have to put into statute that they can be used for these assessments. Is there any other obstacle that we should be aware of?
I'll say that our school construction or our Office of Grants Administration team, they have experience with grants that fund construction programs. Our core system, which is set up to accept these applications, is inherently set up in a way that's asking for certain requirements, such as schematic drawings, the resolutions. I know there's a few superintendents and members from school districts on this call, and I'm sure you have experience with the core system. It's set up in a way that asks for the requirements of a school construction grant program. And so I think if we were to fund the assessments, we would have to consider even a different portal, because I don't think that the portal that we currently have is set up to intake grant applications for funding HVAC maintenance assessments. I'll also share that this would likely, I think there's about 900 schools across the state of Connecticut, a rough estimate. So this means that there would be an increase in the number of grants that we're administering each year, because it would be roughly less than 200, between 150 and 200 grants. So we would need additional resources within the state to respond to that request. So those are two obstacles I can come up with off the top of my head, but I'm happy to take this back to our team and better understand some of the challenges and share that with this group.
Those details are helpful. Thanks, Melissa. And point well taken about the increase in volume of grants your department would have to process. Matt?
Thank you. I would make a suggestion for Melissa that perhaps this could be linked to the portal that was already put up there for people to say whether or not they complied with the statute. So an actual like reimbursement as opposed to a grant. So you wouldn't have to go through the process and, oh, the money's gotten approved and everything else like you do with the school construction. Do the work. When you submit the report on your website and you post on the portal that it was done, then you also put an invoice on there, for reimbursement from the state, just as an idea in general to try and make that a little bit easier.
I appreciate this conversation. I think there's a lot for us to dig into here, but I think we're a little off topic. If I'm not the chair here, so I don't want to overstep, but I think we need to find some consensus on the first recommendation that was put on the table, and perhaps talk about a second recommendation to, maybe we won't have consensus on the grant eligibility for inspections piece.
I appreciate that, Lou. I feel like this is on topic for the second recommendation, so that we can be considering if we want to move forward with that, what exactly will that entail? Because our agencies will have to administer it, and we want to work with them to make sure that this can be a successful program that's not overly onerous for anyone. Because if it's not smooth for our agencies, it won't be smooth for our districts. But happy to get a consensus on the first recommendation of the 5-year sort of phase in, and district sort of autonomy on choosing what 20% of your schools. So Senator, should we do hands?
Certainly, I don't, it's hard to keep track of who's on here. Some people have phone numbers listed and some people have not named themselves in a way that I can match them to the people that are actually on the working group. So we'll do it on the honor system. So please only raise your hand if you're a member of the working group. How's that?
I think that sounds reasonable.
You're a very honorable group.
So if you are in support of the first recommendation for legislation this session, please raise your hand if you're on the working group. Are there any abstentions? And any nays?
I gotta lower my hand, sorry.
You were not abstaining, I'm
I do not
assuming.
abstain.
And no nay votes. Okay, great. Appreciate that. For the second recommendation, and I've done this in the past, I recognize because it directly impacts our agencies, it might be difficult for them to weigh in. So an abstention is understandable. But allowing or proposing legislation this year, the recommendation that the 5-year evaluation is an eligible expense of the grant fund. So, and Julie, I don't know if you want to weigh in before we ask for hands again.
No, I would just make sure that we're talking about the 5-year assessment, just because we've used that uniformly as the
Sorry,
language.
thank you. Thank you. The 5-year assessments being eligible for the grant funds. So if you are in agreement and on the working group, please raise your hand. And then, thank you. Any abstentions? Any nays? All right, thank you. And then for the third recommendation, which is to continue this working group, I first want to recognize you guys have hung with us for 2 years now, and we're really grateful. And I don't think that this work would have progressed in this fashion without your expertise and your guidance. And I feel confident in speaking for Senator Kushner on this one, that we've been so grateful for your partnership and your patience. And I'll let Senator Kushner speak for herself if she wants to weigh in on this third recommendation.
See, I think I kind of did at the beginning in my opening remarks when I praised you all so much. I knew what was coming and wanted to give you positive reinforcement, because I truly think that the work we're doing is really important. And I hope you'll be willing to continue. And if you personally can't, then obviously any one of us can be replaced by someone else.
That is true. That is true. So if you are in agreement with the recommendation that we continue the work of this working group, please raise your hand. I realize I haven't been voting.
I'm not sure the agency people get to replace themselves, though. You might be assigned, but the rest of us can.
Any abstentions? Nays? All right. Great. Thank you. We actually don't have an announcement for the next time and date of a meeting. Apologies for that.
Can I just
Senator,
make
you want to say something?
Yeah, why don't we ask our policy people on the call, and I know we have OLR folks here, and I don't know about LCO, but if we could ask for some help in drafting that proposed legislation, and then we can get it back to you all before we submit it. I know there is a placeholder ready for us to make recommendations. I believe, Jen, is that correct, in the education bill?
Correct. And actually, I don't see Chris Cordima on here, but I have already spoken with him. So I don't want anyone to start working and realize that some work has already taken place.
Great. And then we'll get it back to you before we put it forward. If we're short on time, then we'll just alert you to it, and you can give us suggestions for anything that we've missed or changes that need to be made. We may not need to convene an official meeting, but take your feedback from any member that wants to have input on it.
And Lou, did you want to add something?
Just a quick point of personal privilege. We'd wanted to just make sure, I think we mentioned this to the chairs, or at least floated the idea of the chairs, but just wanted to run this past the full working group. April 9th is National Healthy Schools Day. and our coalition put together a forum last year for National Healthy Schools Day. We would love to partner with the working group for this National Healthy Schools Day. If you all are amenable to this idea, we think it would be a great opportunity for us to hold a small press conference with the chairs and the members of the working group so that we can talk about the outstanding work that we've achieved over the last 2 years, both working through the legislature and some of the really exciting work that's happening here at the working group level. And that's, once again, that would be on April 9th. So I don't know how you would handle that, if a motion right now makes sense or if we need further discussion, but I just wanted to put that out there for everyone. And thank you.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks for coordinating that. I don't know that we need a motion. I think the senator and I will be there. And obviously all and any members of this working group are invited and encouraged and welcome. And if you're planning to come up to the legislature, let us know so we can make sure to meet you and greet you in person.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We'll go ahead and kind of coordinate that, and we'll let members know, and anybody on the working group would be welcome to join us.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Lou. Jan,
Absolutely.
did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just one thing for the good of the order. Thank you, Lou. I think that'd be wonderful. If I can, I'll try to be there as well. But also, as this moves through the process in the General Assembly, I would love to be kept in the loop. So if there's anything I can do to support this work, I would be happy to try to find time in my day to come up and do that.
Appreciate that offer. Thank you.
It will likely be scheduled for a public hearing as part of one of the bills. It may be, I believe it might be one of the larger bills that it's in as a part of, but yes, we can let you all know. And you can testify both in person, but also remotely if that makes it easier for some of you.
Matt?
Just a question for you both with these recommendations. Is it this session that you'd be pointing for? So just to give people an idea of the timeline, right? So I know this it's short, right? So when's the hope that we would get this inserted into a bill and potentially passed? This is an important consideration, especially with rollout for municipalities that are trying to plan for their work this summer.
Absolutely. Let me look at Wednesday's public hearing agenda, see if it's posted. It is. It's not for this Wednesday, which means either next Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. And maybe Cameron, if you're on here, you can also help flag that and notify the working group when this title receives a public hearing. Sorry to task you with this.
It's all right. I'm friends with the education clerk. I can talk with her to work on that.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you. But Matt is 100% correct. This will happen very quickly. In the next 1 or 2 weeks, quite likely.
I do think the one piece of it that we didn't really nail down was the idea of having a 1-year delay for some districts. And why don't we take a stab at that and run it by you guys to try and have something that we could actually present? Because I don't know that the agencies would appreciate it if we left it to them to figure out. But we might do that in the end, but we should discuss it more.
So this would just be a waiver for a 1-year delay for somebody for a district that was able to demonstrate financial hardship?
I'm not sure I want to call it a waiver because there's been some pretty negative responses by school districts to waivers that they've had to apply for recently. So I think a process by which you might get a year's delay.
Extension.
Yeah, an extension.
I think if we don't want to extend the end year, right? So you still are going to be responsible for 100% of your schools to have this evaluation by the 5-year deadline. But if you push it and to do it all in the last 3 years, maybe for this initial cycle, that will be the decision of the district, or in the 4 years rather, not the 3. and give districts flexibility that way, but just being clear in statute perhaps that you are still responsible for all schools being evaluated by that 5-year point. I don't know.
You'd still not be eligible for grant funds until you got your 5-year inspection finished.
Well, let's talk about that because somebody might be applying for grant, might be on track to have all of their schools done and they're applying for a project, a school construction project. Are we saying they wouldn't be eligible for 5 years? Because I'm not sure we want to put that on any school district right now. I think that it might be better to say that they're on track, meaning that they have met their obligation for at least 20% each year. I'm just worried that, we basically no one can do anything for 5 years in the way of school construction because no one, I don't think, except for maybe the smallest districts that are planned to do it, this year or next year. And I don't think that's what we want to do.
And there could be a scenario where it wouldn't make sense to do this 5-year eval if you already are in process of a big construction project, for example.
I think we already have some provision for that, right? Wasn't there some provision? If you have a project that's underway, we know that they have to comply with the current standards now.
I think the language says something like if you have a comparable assessment that you've completed, you can submit for some consideration to have that counted as your 5-year extension, as your 5-year inspection.
Right.
Yeah.
But I like the way you said it, Jen, that you're still on the hook for the full 100% within the 5 years, so that if we give people an extension of 1 year, is what we were talking about, that would mean that, let's say, that 20% that they didn't do in the first year has to be done within the same 5-year period.
Yep. So districts just have to do.
That keeps it very simple.
Yeah. 25% in the remaining 4 years, for example. I want to be cognizant of the time. It's already a little past 2, and I'm so grateful everyone takes an hour in the middle of their day to participate in these really robust and productive conversations. I want to allow if there were any final remarks that folks feel like we didn't get to. And Senator Kushner, if you want to say any final remarks.
No, I'm great. Thank you. I appreciate everybody.
And we will make sure to get the information to you about the public hearing for this bill.
Thank you.
And I guess with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice weekend.
You too.